Last but not least, a very, very important panel that we will introduce. And after the panel is concluded, please remember on your way out to take a wonderful gift from the Bank of Palestine, which is on my right hand. It is in, each gift is in a bag, so please take it on your way. And thank you, Bank of Palestine, for doing this. I would like to introduce the panel, U.S. Presidential Election Results, Implications and Prospects for Peace in the Middle East. I will introduce Mr. Saber Shami, who will then introduce his panelists, and we'll move it that way. We will start with, yes. Yes, yes, please. How are you? Careful your ankles. Right. Okay, let me introduce Mr. Saber Shami. Mr. Shami has over 26 years of government relations and state government work in Washington and Richmond, advising an ambassador, a president of a grassroots national organization, and working for 2 Virginia governors, first as key campaign advisor and then as top political appointee. Mr. Shami served the Commonwealth of Virginia for 10 years in several key positions under Governors Mark R. Warner and Timothy M. Kaine, Assistant Commissioner at the DMV, Special Assistant to the Secretary of Commerce and Trade, Chief Deputy Commissioner of Agriculture and Consumer Services, and Chief Deputy Director of the Department of Professional and Occupational Regulation. Most recently, he served as Director of Special Projects at the Virginia Port Authority between January 2009 and August 2011. And before joining the Warner administration, Mr. Shami served as principal owner of Washington Works, LLC, a public affairs firm, working with different interest groups and promoting their points of view on Capitol Hill in the different departments and federal agencies in Washington and with the Virginia state government. Mr. Shami is a graduate of Goshen College in Indiana. He attended Bethany Theological Seminary in Oak Brook, Illinois, and is a graduate of the Virginia Executive Institute, and he is fluent in several languages. It's our honor.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you for being with us.
Is there any time left for the panel?
All the time, all the time. So you take it from here.
You mind if we start right
Please,
here?
please
Dr.
go
Zogby, are you going to make an introduction of...
Maybe you can make
No,
it.
don't be.
No?
Okay. Well, first of all, let me tell you, the most association, the proudest association of mine is the fact that I worked with Dr. James Zogby for the past 32 years, I believe it has been, since the days when Dr. Zogby headed the Palestine Human Rights Campaign. It is worth noticing and noting that Dr. James Zogby, a Lebanese American, was the hardest working Arab American on behalf of Palestinian rights. So it's worth noting. And I think that probably suffices. Thank you. Clearly, I did not expect to read the long biographies, but I can tell you this. I had the chance to chat with Mr. Abdurrahman, with Dr. Asad Abdurrahman for the past half hour or so, and I can tell you he is a person of serious convictions about the mission that he has taken on himself to fulfill for the Palestinian people. He's a member of the executive committee of the PLO, as well as a chairman of the Palestinian International Institute, and I hope it's not an institute competing with Dr. Zogby's institute.
No way.
It's
no
not.
way.
Okay. One of the most important and most common conversations we have among Arab Americans, and specifically Palestine. Can you hear me all? Specifically among Palestinian Americans is, would the new president or the re-elected president do anything different vis-a-vis the issue of Palestine, now that, especially we're talking about re-elected presidents. We had several of those in the past 30 years, and our hopes were dashed every time we had elected a president for a second term, because our expectation meter was a little uncalibrated, because we thought that just because he's less vulnerable in the second term, that the issue of Palestine becomes a first priority to the president, not taking into consideration the many factors that go into a decision-making within the administration and on Capitol Hill, and the balance of powers and the power of certain lobbies here versus the almost lack of power that we find ourselves in every time we try to hope for better approach to solving the issue of Palestine, or as it has been termed for the past 18 years, the peace process. The Arab American community, and I can speak only for that, clearly we have a large Muslim American community that has been very active in politics, but I'll speak for Arab Americans, at least in Virginia, I can speak with confidence, that we have really instituted our role in the political process on both sides of the aisle in a way that they cannot, they meaning the powers to be in both parties, cannot do anything vis-a-vis the Middle East without at least thinking or checking with us for the soundness of that action or position taken. If you notice that the Virginia delegation in general, with the exception of Mr. Cantor of Richmond, has been quite reasonable when it comes to the issue of Palestine. With probably the closest and most accessible member of Congress on the issues of Palestinians and Palestinian rights being my good friend and Jim Zogby's good friend, Congressman Jim Moran. I can assure you that the new senator from Virginia, Tim Kaine, will most probably follow suit. He is a person of character, of convictions, and I am sure that he will be a new friend to our community in the U.S. Congress. I think between the introduction, my introduction, introducing me and this, I've taken too much time. Let's do this. Let's divide this panel to presentations by the two speakers, 10 minutes each. Is that about?
Okay.
You need more? And then instead of having question and answer period, why don't we turn it into a dialogue? Whereby you can, preferably if you actually line up behind the microphone, and let's have a dialogue that at least produces some ideas for action. And I'm sure you know there are several people among us here who are active also, in addition to supporting this magnificent effort, are also active in politics and can convey the sentiments expressed here to their representatives in U.S. Congress. Let's start with our guest from Ramallah, from Palestine, Dr. Abdurrahman, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen, since we're supposed to be engaged in on our part for just 10 minutes, let me start by sending some telegrams rather than deep analysis, but the chance for that would be during the dialogue that Mr. Shami has just finished explaining. My starting point would be, there was a time when many Palestinian factions, many Palestinian groups, and as a matter of fact, many Arab factions and groups used to think of the US, since we're going to talk about the president, as if they are the minor power and as if they were the superpower. It seems that this virus has infected the Israeli leadership now, whereby they have been treating President Obama and the US as if it is a minor power compared with the confidence they have in their own state, namely Israel, as well as in their protrusions, particularly in the American Congress. The major mistake that anybody could fall into is to assume that the superpower of the superpowers, the US, is a minor power, is a power whereby one can twist its arm easily. And we have to remember in this regard that the US, while it's being the superpower, we admit that we have a regional superpower, namely Israel, that has been really dominating the scene militarily and politically because of the contacts it has with its diaspora, because of the contacts it has through them with the various states and particularly the American Congress, as well as some aspects of the American society. Now, we all know, and we're not going to waste any time on the tension that was built between Mr. Netanyahu on the one hand, and now together with him, because they have just got into an alliance, electoral alliance with Mr. Lieberman, and the tension mounted all through the last 4 years with the American president and with the American administration. This is why it was the first time that an Israeli prime minister almost publicly, almost explicitly takes a position against a running president and supporting his competitor. These days, if you go through the Israeli political literature, you would notice immediately the campaign against Netanyahu and his policies simply because he did what he did. And now they said he really managed to antagonize the winner while he was trying to make the winner a loser. And there's lots of uproar against Netanyahu and his government, to the point that he is being seen as somebody who has been shooting in his own foot. Now, if we come to the outcome of the American presidential elections, there are many, and there have been all kinds of authoritative polls that would confirm that Mr. Obama had a popularity outside the US, maybe more than the popularity he proved to have within the US. The Arab world included. However, there was a time when Obama's popularity, especially in the first year and half of his first tenure, was really high, very high. And he appeared as if he is the one who's going to finally twist the hand of the Israeli occupation to stop the colonization, which is called building settlements. In fact, it's building colonies, as you all know. However, before the end of the second year, the wave shifted in the other direction. And it's a well-known fact now that Obama did to Israel on the strategic level more than any other president at all. And I'm not here quoting Obama, who tried during the electoral campaign to state that matter, or his entourage. I'm quoting here Israeli sources, including Netanyahu. The only remark that Netanyahu made after the success of Obama, and though it was in a very apologetic way, is that he admitted that the military relations between the US and Israel has reached a real climax. However, in our part of the world, people are really divided into three currents of thought when it comes, what do we expect from Mr. Obama? Some are very pessimistic. They would say, well, we have seen what happened after the year and a half of the first tenure, and how he moved from one extreme to the other, and he accepted almost all the Israeli components of their political position, and is not going to do anything. Others, on the other side of the pendulum, are quite optimistic. They say, oh no, he couldn't do what he wanted to do in the first tenure, simply because in such situations, and particularly because the Congress is composed in the manner it is composed of, he couldn't but lower his head in front of the tsunami that was leveled against him by Israel, the Zionist movement, Israel and its allies, etc., especially its allies within the Congress, which gave more applaud, and at any point of time would give more applaud to Netanyahu than the Knesset itself, despite the fact that he now has control over the Israeli Knesset with numbers that are really unprecedented. And in the middle, as usual, you would find the third current of thought, who would say, well, we will keep our fingers crossed, let's hope for the best, we shouldn't really be that pessimistic or that optimistic, etc. Those who are optimistic would bring the following arguments in favor of their optimism. They would say, the American establishment, and not only the American administration, not only President Obama, have been realizing all through the last few years that the American national interests are really being threatened by the Israeli policies, and Israel should be saved against its own will from the fanaticism that they are practicing. And that fanaticism is not only hurting Israel, but it's hurting also the ultimate high strategic American interest, especially after the Arab Spring, and we will have a chance to elaborate on that. So the first source of optimism is that the Israeli policies have stirred, have antagonized those who see in their attitude a threat to the strategic interests of the American administration, as well as the USA itself. And others would even go to the personalistic level, if we may refer to that in this terminology, that the bad blood in the relationship between Israel and the US now, specifically between the leader of Israel, Netanyahu, and the leader of the US, President Obama, to the point that it will push Obama in the direction of trying to show who's the boss, who's the real superpower, who has got the final say. Is it the international superpower or the regional superpower with its extensions and protrusions within the superpower? As far as I'm concerned, I do believe that any American president would have in his second term a margin. And that margin shouldn't be really exaggerated. If anybody thinks that Obama can do whatever he wants, then he would be totally mistaken the way I see it. But if anybody assumes that Obama, should he decide to follow his own original positions, and by the way, we all know that Obama is very well acquainted with the Palestinian plight and the Arab-Israeli cause, etc. If he wants to follow what he almost started in his first tenure, then he could make a difference, but it's not going to be, in my opinion, a very big difference. The margin could be 10%, but 10% sometimes is not little, nor it should be seen as if it is 50% or 60%. The Obama administration is having lots of problems, and there is a tendency all over the world, particularly back home, to think that as if Obama is doing nothing except focusing his attention on the Arab-Israeli conflict, on the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. We all know the difficulties that the American administration is facing, would be facing, and that would be also a limitation on its role. Having consumed 11 minutes of what I'm allowed, I stop here, and I'll be ready to answer any of your questions, at least try to answer any of your questions.
Before we ask Dr. Zogby to present his views on the subject, I would like to just remind everyone here that back when the French decided to impose an embargo on the sale of aircrafts on Israel back in '68, followed by the Nixon re-evaluation of the relationship with Israel, a decision was made here among the leadership of the pro-Israel community, you can name it anything you want, that they will not allow these situations to take place again, and therefore the process of the so-called occupying Capitol Hill started. Very deliberate, very clear plan to blackmail, if necessary, members who do not fall in line, and to defeat others, as well as create, put up candidates that challenge the person who does not follow orders. And we've seen this here firsthand in Northern Virginia when the lobby set up a person who was never a member of the party. Suddenly he became a Democrat and he had 5,000 signatures and all of that, and he was put up against James Moran, the gentleman I mentioned earlier. And it was the effort of the Arab and the Muslim community in the primary that defeated that attempt. I just wanted to give you some historic context to understand why we are not doing as well as we wanted, because we have not done the same organizing in all parts of the nation, despite the tremendous effort that Dr. Zogby led for the past 30 years. The Arab American Institute has done a tremendous job. However, we still lag way behind the other community. Dr. Zogby.
Let me begin with just an overview. Usually, actually over the last 4 decades, the most pressing issue, at least in the Middle East, facing a president, whether first term or second term, has been the Arab-Israeli conflict. The first issue we have to address today is that that's not the case right now. And it is a reality check that is in order. First, we have what I call the consequences of the Bush years. They're still with us. There is a deformation or a series of, I call them pathological developments that took place in the Israeli and in the Palestinian context that are still there. Israel has become emboldened. It is the spoiled child. It can do what it wants to do and feels it'll get away with anything, and it usually does. As a result of that, politics in Israel have moved to the right rather significantly. It's almost impossible to conceive of putting together a center-left or even a center coalition in Israel. If not Netanyahu, someone else, but it will be a right-leaning coalition. Even with the 10 or 11, how many Arab Party representatives there are, you can't cobble together the 60 you need or 61 you need to have a majority government. And even with that, the weakness of it is such that its ability to move, as we've seen in the past, is limited. At the same time, there's a dysfunctionality on the Palestinian side. It's severed in two. It cannot come to an agreement. It is subject, both parties are dependencies, whether dependent on the United States and the international community for aid, as is the case in the Palestinian Authority, or whether dependent on Iran or on Qatar now or whoever, as is the case with the Gaza situation. What Arafat struggled for, independent decision-making, is no longer the case. And that's a reality that has to be dealt with, I think, is that something as hopeful as the Mecca Accords were destroyed because of the dependency factor. And so efforts to create unity, efforts to create a unified Palestinian presence in a leadership way have been impeded by external players. Thirdly, the third consequence is that Iran has been emboldened in the region, and it has been empowered in the region. The destruction of Iraq, or the creation of Iraq as almost an Iranian, not quite satellite, I think that goes too far, but an Iranian playground where they have the ability to project themselves into the region, has become a real issue. An issue that affects not just what the U.S. perceives of as its interests, but also U.S. allies and the stability of the broader region. Iran's weakened, no doubt. Sanctions have taken a toll. And also weakened because you now have new players that are sort of stepping into the breach, with Turkey playing trying to play a more expansive role, and Qatar fighting way above its weight, also trying to play a regional role, and the Saudis as well. you had this regional competition for hegemony playing out, unfortunately, in Syria, which began as the rest of the Arab Spring, kind of a revolution looking for democratic freedom, but has now become a surrogate war between Iran on the one side and the Saudis and Qataris and people that they're supporting, each of them supporting on the other. The second set of issues are the issues brought on by Arab Spring, which are serious, very serious for the United States. I mean, the region was, for 4 decades, relatively stable. I mean, stable in a way maybe that didn't serve the interests of all of the people of the region, but Egypt was going nowhere. Tunisia was going, I mean, they were just doing what they were doing, and you could count on them. It was a predictable setting. It is no longer a predictable setting. And so with many moving parts, there's a lot of concern among policymakers here as to where the various moving parts go. And one of the issues, of course, is this rise of political Islam and what it means and what shape it takes. You know, we had the case in Egypt where you had the Brotherhood, which we said at one point, people would say at one point, well, the Salafi movement is a great check on the Brotherhood. It'll move them more towards moderation. It appears to move them in the opposite direction because now there's a check on the Salafis, even to the more extreme of them, the demonstrations in Cairo yesterday. And the result is that you now have no idea where Egypt is going. And when we speak about Christians in the Middle East, the situation of the Copts is quite serious, and people are very concerned about where that goes. And the U.S. in this administration is very concerned about the Copts and where the future of Egypt goes. It's not over by a long shot in Egypt, and we have still an additional problem, and that is that in short order, Egypt may become insolvent as an economy. And without the kind of money necessary to bail it out, the question is what happens. It's an economy that's been driven by exports and tourism, both of which are down, and the question of where Egypt gets its income and how it moves forward and how it provides. Look, one of the interesting things when we poll in Egypt is that in every Arab country, including Egypt, when we say, what are your top political priorities? We always get the same. First is the economy, second is education, and the third is healthcare. Pretty much what you get from Americans. After Arab Spring, in every Arab country we polled, it was what I call the Arab Spring effect. Something in the order of democracy or reform or something like that crept into the top tier. Every single country. When you ask the question, what do you want the U.S. to help you with, the political Arab Spring issue was never there. They want the U.S. to help with the economy, with healthcare and education in all of these places. Egypt is the only country where no Arab Spring effect occurred. When we polled in Egypt before the revolution, the top issue was economy, education, and healthcare. When we polled after the revolution, it was the economy, education, and healthcare. This was a revolution about the economy. It was not about democracy. Egypt may have gotten chaos and democracy, but it didn't get an improved economy. And we're waiting to see where the public in Egypt goes, whether there's a revolution of the hungry, whether there's a backlash, whether there is some kind of alternate movement in Egypt. And that will come within the next year or so, where people say, what did we get out of this? What is going to happen? We're no better off than we were before this started, and I don't know where that goes. And the other countries in the Arab Spring, Yemen and Libya, they remain no less, not only not stable, but they remain almost ungovernable. And Libya is a mess. Evidence of the fact that when you don't win your own revolution, you can't govern after the revolution, which is one of the reasons why the Syria situation is so troubling. For the SNC to be sitting in Turkey or sitting wherever it sits and saying, help us, take this over, no-fly zone, corridor, humanitarian corridor, blah, blah, blah. If you cannot win your revolution, you can't govern after the revolution. And the question is, we have a brutal regime that has to go, but with nothing to replace it. And the U.S. is stymied by this, facing this humanitarian disaster, but struggling with how we make sense of this and how we deal with both the crisis of conscience of doing nothing, but at the same time the wariness they have of doing something that may actually make the situation worse, or may create a situation, if John McCain had had his way, where we end up as ground down in a war in Syria as we were in Iraq, with no good outcome. And whenever I have these folks come to me and say, oh no, if you go in, as they have come to my office and told me, if you come in, if you liberate us, we'll be America's friend, and Syria will go from an enemy to a friend. The Afghanis said the same thing to me about 30-something years ago. Shalabi and his folks said the same thing to me 20 years ago. I mean, the fact is that it never plays out that way. And the last place the U.S. wants to be right now is boots on the ground in Syria, trying to deal with the situation that they know ultimately has no good outcome for the United States, and maybe also no good outcome right now for the Syrian people. The danger of it spilling over, as we have warning signs it may, into Lebanon or Jordan or into Turkey with the Kurds, is something that everyone is watching. And then there's Iraq. And the mess of Iraq is still not over. Fully a year after their election, they had no government, and they still do not have an accepted government. It hovers between becoming a dictatorship or collapsing into chaos. And we're still not sure which direction it goes in, and how much of a role Iran plays in it, and whether or not the sectarian conflicts and the ethnic conflicts become worse. And then there's Iran and the nuclear program, which, while some in the US say, who cares? And that is in decision-making circles. Let them get a bomb. What are they going to do with it? Sit on it? Eat it? Feed their people with it? But the concern in the region among allies we have in the Gulf, and the pressure coming from Israel, is such that the president cannot ignore the Iran situation. And everyone knows that Iran wants a bomb, not because it'll ever use it, because it can't, as we found here in the United States after the Soviets finally, when they finally got a bomb. There's no first use. There's no second. The only time you get a first use is if you're the only one with it. But when everybody else has one around you that you're worried about, then there's no first use, no second use. There's no use at all. All you get out of it is bragging rights, and that is also a big concern. And that is that Iran's target has never been Israel. Iran's target has always been across the water, and not target militarily, but target for bragging rights. They've been wanting to export the revolution since the revolution began, in terms of, we are the ones who stand up against Israel, we're the ones who stand up against the United States, and we are the ones who are the true whatever. And the issue is the bomb simply gives them an additional bragging rights. If they got it, and even if they don't get it, it's almost like the Farrakhan factor. Farrakhan was a royal pain in the neck when we were in the Jackson campaign, but at every point that Jackson began to go up, Farrakhan would say something outrageous. When he said something outrageous, he knew exactly what would happen. Abe Foxman from the ADL would attack him. 5 senators would denounce him. People would come and say to the party, you must force Jesse Jackson to denounce him. And Jesse was stuck, because Farrakhan's game was exactly this. If he was the baddest guy in town, he would get the attention and the support. And so what the Iranians know how to do is become the baddest guy in town. And they know that by being the baddest guy in town, they ultimately sort of draw attention to themselves on the other side, on the Arab side. This is a competition for Arab attention, not for Israel. And Israel is a handy foil. Attacking Israel, threatening Israel, denouncing the United States plays well among alienated Arab masses who want someone to champion them. All of those are the issues that the president is facing right now. And the Palestinian one, unfortunately, tragically, is not there. And I think we have to deal with that. It would only put itself on the map again if Palestine put itself on the map again. There's no pressure from the Arabs to do it. In the past, there was always this issue that it was the central issue. You had to solve it to realize, to promote peace and stability in the Middle East. That's no longer the case. No one feels that way. No one is telling the president that. None of the Arab leaders are telling him that, and everything he sees playing around with Syria and Lebanon and Jordan, everyone's got fish to fry, and Palestine's not on the map. Would that change if there were a third intifada? Would it change if there was some other political development that would move it forward? Absolutely, in a heartbeat. Palestine remains the open wound in the Arab world that never healed. It remains the issue that is the most evocative one in the Arab world, but it's been quiescent. And as long as it's quiescent, there's no pressure to do anything, and therefore it's not on the agenda of the president right now. Morally, it may be. I think intellectually, from what I know of him, it is. Does he think Netanyahu is a pain in the ass? Absolutely. But is he going to do anything about it? No, because there's too many other fish to fry right now. I just want to be as honest with you as I can. Let me just make a couple of observations about this Netanyahu-Obama tension. It's real. There's no question about it that it's real. And they'll paper over it and play with it and try to convince even themselves that it's not there, because there's no advantage to it staying there. President Obama is bigger than having a feud with this little guy in Israel. He doesn't want to have a big fight because it doesn't play well for him in Congress. He needs right now to get support to move us away from a financial cliff, which we're in danger of falling off before the end of the year. He's got to get the budget in order. He wants to press for immigration reform. He wants to have a couple of domestic victories, and he wants to get something to happen in foreign policy that begins to make sense and reestablish American leadership in areas where it matters that we have leadership. He doesn't need a fight that he doesn't need. In addition, we have an election in Israel. The biggest thing you need to watch for now, whether or not there's going to be a dramatic change or not, is does the president, does he give Netanyahu a shoulder to cry on, or does he turn a cold shoulder to him? That's going to be an issue. The attacks in Israel, I said, you're absolutely right. I mean, they've been following them, and it's very real. When America sniffles Israel, catches cold, I mean, they don't like the thought that American presidents are alienated from them, even though the American president's not going to do anything with it. They just want them, they want to get loved. They want to know that they're being loved. That's the spoiled child syndrome. The issue here is that will the president go out of his way to antagonize him? I don't think so. But does he go out of his way to help him? If he does, then you know that nothing's going to happen at all. But if the president stays quiet, if he says, they got an election, I'm not going to get into this, I'm not going to say anything to help the guy out, I'm not going to, just you all decide who leads you and whatever. If Olmer or whoever leads the new center, whatever, comes to America and Obama gives him the treatment that Netanyahu gave Romney, that'll also give you a signal. That's what Clinton did, if you recall. Clinton was very clever with Netanyahu. He never publicly condemned him because he said he wouldn't. But they sat on a tarmac together in Los Angeles, if you recall. Clinton got a haircut, was too busy to meet with Netanyahu while he was in the next plane. They sat there for an hour and a half, and Clinton said, no, I have no time to see him. And then he flew back to Washington, and that night had a dinner for Shimon Peres at the White House. Very clear signal being sent to the Israeli people. I don't like this guy. But he never publicly said anything against him. I went with Gore to a dinner at the Knesset. Gore had me come along with him, which itself sent a message that he was bringing me with him to the dinner. Sat me down with the whole group. When a couple of them started to get on my case, Gore came over, rescued me, and brought me to sit with Mrs. Rabin. Netanyahu came over to see Gore. Gore turned his back on him and refused to speak with him the entire night. The message was clear from the Clinton people, we weren't dealing with you. Does Obama do the same thing to Netanyahu? That'll be an interesting sign before January 22nd or 3rd, the election. It'll be interesting to see what he does. And the final thing, of course, is this UN vote. If it goes forward, I can fully expect the U.S. is going to veto or vote against or pressure people to vote against. I think it's dumb. We've been arguing with them about it for a long time. If Abu Mazen backs away from it, I mean, you can just do this so many times and not look silly, and it's just not looking good right now. So I don't know how many times the Palestinians can say, we're going to do it, we're going to do it, we're going to do it. No, we're not going to do it, we're going to do it another time. And get away with it and still look good. our sense is that the U.S. has to give them something. They ought not to put the U.S. in a position where they know they're going to say no and vote against it and actually lobby against it and force Congress to cut aid, because they will. But that they've already gone out and said that they're gonna. And so now everybody's hands are tied on it. And I would assume that unless people can come back with a clever fallback position, i.e. give us X, Y, and Z, and we won't bring it to a vote, which is, I understand, something in the works, maybe, but we'll also get a pretty good indication early on about that. But if there's simply a decision to pull back the vote, not do the vote, that would, I think, be, it's kind of expected, but it's not a good thing. But I think I'll stop there. I think I've gone far enough. Thank you. Not a hopeful scenario, but I hope a real scenario.
Dr. Zogby is always insightful, and his analysis is always fascinating. I wanted to just say that, to just reemphasize a point that Jim made, and that is about the level of support of the Arab states and heads of states for a Palestinian statehood, the idea of Palestinian statehood. Let me tell you this encounter I had with President Jimmy Carter a year after he left office. I was at CSIS for some conference, and I walked up to him and introduced myself as a Palestinian Christian, and I told him that it is totally puzzling to us. I was naive. I'm still a little naive. I said, how come, this great nation with majority Christians don't see the need to support our aspiration for statehood? And he looked at me in the most loving way. He's such a nice person, and he said he didn't. I didn't even remember to introduce myself, but I had my name tag. He said, Saba, I've visited about 16 Arab countries. None of the head states ever raised the issue of Palestinian statehood with me. Why do you expect America to do it for you?
This is what President Carter said
Yes,
too, yeah.
yes, sir.
As
Back
well.
in '82, a
Yes,
year
yeah.
after he left office.
Yeah, very true.
One final point. You wanted an agenda issue to think about and work on? The issue of Christians in the Middle East is serious and precarious and worrisome. And it should no longer just be focused on the Holy Land itself, but the whole region. And there has to be a way to raise this issue without it becoming and fueling sectarian flames, especially here in America. What the Bush administration allowed to happen to the Chaldean community was absolutely shameful and abominable. I mean, George Bush will burn in hell for that one, pardon me. But the reality is that this was the destruction of an ancient Christian community, and that they never even saw it happening, and that they let it happen when it started to happen was absolutely inexcusable. That's the concern in Syria right now. We're very concerned about what happens in Egypt. The Lebanon situation is more complicated and different, but Palestine. There are different causes, but it's the same presence of a Christian community in the Middle East. And I do think that, if there's anybody in danger of getting thrown under the bus, it's the Christian community. And so the way it's got to be raised without becoming a sectarian Muslim Christian issue, but it has to be raised. And I think it's something that, if done right, there are two kinds of allies you'll have in Congress. One will be the Islamophobes, and you don't want them. They're going to be raising it. And the others are those who are concerned with peace, justice, and human rights. And those are the ones you've got to get to. This is something that should be led by Jim Moran, not by Frank Wolf.
Okay.
And the question is how to get the right guys to pick it up and run with it and not let the bad guys get it. Because if the bad guys get it, and they're already doing resolutions on it, if they take it over, it's going to become an issue that will only work against the ultimate goal we want.
Jim, I think since you raised the issue of the United Nations, and I think this is a somewhat sensitive issue among Palestinians right now, because also, although we see that it is a little bit childish to keep on doing the same thing and fail, some people among us, I'm not one, see that repeating the same, taking the same route again and again might actually find us eventually on the right path. I'm not saying I support that or agree with that. I'm saying
Yeah.
that some people think
Yeah.
that, but I think Dr. Abdurrahman has some idea, but some ideas.
Well, I'm trying. I'll try just to describe what I know. I know for a fact, and which has become a public fact now, that the Palestinians, when President Abu Mazen declared 2 months ago or a month ago that he's going to go back again to the United Nations, the Palestinians back home, if compared with their position and the demonstrations and the genuine joy that they had the first time, as if there was nothing.
Yeah.
And I fully agree here that even in Palestine, because Jim mentioned several Arab countries where the economic factor is the dominating one, and the case is the same in Palestine. And we've seen that the last and the first demonstrations in years that took place in the West Bank were against the authority for economic reasons. Now, they showed great amount of apathy, not only because they are involved in their economic worries only, but also because of the so many attempts or talks or announcements about going to the UN and not going to the UN. I remember 6 months ago when I was with Abu Mazen discussing our affairs privately, as we generally do, he confided in me and said, look, we're going to the United Nations and before the American elections. And I started wondering whether that is wise or not. But he sounded very determined that he would go regardless of the American response, whether from the side of the administration, which has been threatening that they would be against, etc., and or from the Congress, which is much more vehement about it. And then with the elapse of weeks, well, I should give him the credit, at least the excuse, let me put it that way, that he has been exposed to tremendous amount of pressures from the Americans as well as from the European countries, advising him against going to the UN at least before the elections. It seems to me that there is a certain kind of undeclared arrangement or a compromise that has been struck maybe 2 months ago. Don't go to the UN. And we have here to understand the psychology of Abu Mazen. He's no more in the mood of staying in power theoretically, being a president theoretically, while he's being insulted daily, while he is being discredited daily. So he sounded as a man who was about to do it regardless. But it seems to me, and from other sources, that due to all these pressures and due to the determination on his side to go ahead with it before the American elections, there seems to have been a compromise constructed whereby delay it till after the elections, and then we will have to be against it. I'm referring here to the American administration, and we will send letters to all kinds of allies, Europeans, etc., as it has been done already, but without really following it up very vehemently, very strongly. Now, the decision was taken that it would be on the 15th of November. And the last I heard, because the last two meetings I couldn't attend for a multitude of reasons, that it has been, the date has been set for the 29th, which is the Solidarity Day with the Palestinian people. And I think it would be politically tragic if that is not done. I'm not talking about the wisdom of going or the lack of wisdom in not going. I'm talking about what has become politically unfeasible to the president if he backs on that. I believe he would go. I believe he would go regardless. I wanted to add this last few remarks just to whet your appetite perhaps for questions or dialogue or whatever.
Why don't we do this? We'll direct the remarks, if you want to call it question, that's fine, directly to the person you want to answer that remark, that question. And let's not have too many dialogues back and forth. Let's limit it to two remarks.
Sure. For me, it's one question. Sorry, I can't choose between the two, so let me just ask a question if you don't mind. What I saw in the news just last week is some person from the Israeli government saying, should the PA continue with its efforts to seek statehood, that they're going to undermine the PA to the point that they're going to bring it down. Another way of looking at it is, given what you just said, actually, if they do pull the trigger and request statehood at the United Nations, then that's going to be vetoed. That's going to be defeated. It's hard to see that actually going through. And if that happens, then there's no return to negotiation. And if that happens, it's only, to me, my own personal interpretation, obviously it could be very wrong, is that that's the beginning of the end of the PA. My question is not, whether they're going to go down, they're not going to go down. Assuming they go down, maybe by Israeli action, is that a case of you break it, you own it? And does that de facto create the one-state solution, i.e., Israel takes the Palestinian Authority out of the equation, somebody has to govern the areas in the West Bank. Nobody else, who else is going to do it other than Israel? Does that by, de facto become a one-state solution?
Defeated, no. I think if he goes to the United Nations, and there have been all kinds of calculations, despite the too many pressures that I referred to. But the question had Abu Mazen and the Palestinian leadership accepted the Sarkozy advice last September, not last September, the September before, they would have really come up with quantitative as well as qualitative support in the United Nations. Because quantitatively, it could have reached the 2/3. And that was the aspiration, really. Qualitatively, most of the West European countries, and that is where quality is, would have voted for, with the confirmed exceptions of 2 or 3 countries. Number 1, Germany, Holland, and I've forgotten the 3rd country. But now, no, it's not going to fail, depending on the calculations that have been made most recently. But if we're talking about 50% plus 1, it will pass through. But if we're talking about the 2/3 aspiration and more, as it was not last September, the September before, it would have been different. End of the PA. Well, let me add to the, what shall I call it? Let me add to the shortcomings, killing points of the PA and the PLO, as well as the whole political structure, by saying that there is a serious, very serious, built-in leadership problem among the Palestinians. Just imagine Abu Mazen disappears. And I've said that to him several times. Look, I told him once, your son Mazen had a heart attack a few years back, and he's your son. So, I mean, you're not immune against heart attacks. He was going to Saudi Arabia. I remember I said, well, you're a good Muslim and you believe in God and faith, etc. But what if the aeroplane falls? Who's next? And that was 3.5 years ago. The situation now is really that bad. And that's why this is one of the strongest points that Abu Mazen has got vis-a-vis the American administration or vis-a-vis Europe or any other active actor. Number one. Number two, he is definitely in a mood whereby he wouldn't accept to continue the way he has been treated by everybody during the last year or so. So he's in the mood of PA dissolving PO. He's not going to take a decision to dissolve the PA, definitely. That is even a formal decision by the whole leadership. But they will let it go as long as the Israelis are pushing in that direction, as well as the American administration is pushing in that direction by not taking serious decisions into solving the problem. So he doesn't care whether the PA remains or fades away. One state solution, it's going to be one state, but not solution. One state occupation. One apartheid state. It would be a de facto thing. And many say, let it be. But solution, no Israeli. I know of no Israeli except Alain Papé who would accept a one-state solution. It would be a one-state apartheid state, occupation state. Thank you.
We have exactly 7 minutes based on my phone clock here. So can we,
Quick
who is it?
question.
Is it for
Dr. Zaghi,
Dr.
yes.
Zaghi?
Just have a quick question. What should the U.S. policy be towards an Islamist government in Egypt? Should it be one in which we insist upon rights for women and things of that nature before we release money, or should we just focus on the three things that are most important to them as we relate to the Egyptians, as you said, economy, education, and I can't remember the third thing?
Healthcare. You know, I've thought about this a lot, about our foreign aid programs in the region and about our general behavior toward many governments. I think the president had it best a year and a half ago in May when he gave the second anniversary speech about the Cairo, the second anniversary of his Cairo speech at the State Department. Boy, I didn't say that right. The speech commemorating the second anniversary of the Cairo speech. That's
Okay.
it. All right, good.
We got it.
You got it? Okay, good. And well, the second part of the speech got all the news coverage, and that was the 67 borders with land swaps that created the big furor, and was the weakest part of the speech, I thought. The first part of the speech on the Arab Spring was really quite interesting. And in it, he didn't just lay out the trajectory of the Arab Spring, but he made what, for an American president, is a rather humble declaration. We didn't start it. We can't direct it. We can't determine the outcome. All we can do is help. And then he laid out a series of ideas of what helping would mean. And, all of them involved U.S. assistance programs being structured to help these emerging Arab democracies create jobs. create infrastructure, build capacity to meet the challenges that they'd face. I was at the speech, and I was sitting next to somebody. I turned to them and I said, "This is not a speech to the Arab world. This is a speech to Congress." He's actually challenging Congress to step up to the plate and do something. Well, they didn't. The enterprise fund that the U.S. has proposed for Egypt, going back well over a year and a half, almost 2 years now, has still not been approved. My feeling has been Egypt doesn't need military assistance. That was a way of buying the military to be our friends and to create an economy within the economy, a state within the state run by the military. That military assistance program never even actually was a benefit to anybody but U.S. arms suppliers. We always congratulated ourselves about whenever they would get challenged in Congress, people would say, in response, they'd say, 82 cents on every one of the dollars we spend on this military assistance program to Egypt gets spent back here in the U.S. It doesn't even go to the Egyptians. It goes to U.S. arms suppliers. And so the issue is, what do? I've always argued that we should structure the money away from state to state or military assistance programs to enterprise funds to help grow the private sector. Egypt needs jobs. Jobs not going to get created by the military, it's going to get created by the private sector. But there is no fund to help private sector economic. I mean, this is the free enterprise economy. We don't do anything to support free enterprise activity anywhere in the world. And so an enterprise fund doing what we did in Eastern Europe, where we created all these enterprise funds, for Albania and for Romania and for every one of these countries, there is one. There isn't anything for the Arab world like that. I thought that for the Palestinians, back when we first created the aid program itself, I argued, should have been an enterprise fund. A fund that would provide assistance, loans, grants, outright grants to private sector, small, medium businesses that wanted to grow the local economy. That's still where we ought to go with the aid program. So on Egypt, we should have an aid program for Egypt, whoever the government is, as long as it's an enterprise fund that supports private sector and not government to government. But with regard to the government, the two issues that we have raised, and I know the administration has raised, is that in the Constitution and in the governance system they set up, rights of minorities, religious minorities, but not as religious minorities. I don't want to create dhimmi of the Christians in Egypt. Equal citizenship rights for all people in Egypt, regardless of religion or gender. That should be the principle. That's the message the administration has sent, and that's what we ought to stand by.
And that's what the new patriarch, by the way, the new Coptic patriarch, explicitly has said on Tuesday. I saw him on Dream TV,
Yes.
and he said that we do not want privileges, set-asides, or quotas. We want equal citizenship, and that guarantees our existence.
We've been pushing that issue from the time President Obama gave his first speech in Cairo, and he spoke about the rights of minorities. I went crazy, calling the White House, beating up on people. I mean, was furious with that, because whoever the hell wrote that speech didn't understand that when you say minority rights,
Exactly.
that's not where we want to be. That's not where the Arab world needs to be. Been there, done that. That's not good. We want equal citizenship rights. That's critical.
Let's take the last question. You were in line, right? You're fine? Okay.
I just want to say thank you to all of you, and the question is to Dr. Zogby. I think your analysis is very, very accurate for the region, and that's how our group feels as well. In light of the fact that there aren't any funds available in the Middle East to do those kinds of development projects, what do you suggest as a solution? We've heard your analysis, but what do you suggest as a possible solution? You may have partially answered that, but...
One more thing.
Yeah.
We've heard the 552 things why it's not in our best interest as Americans, or it's not going to happen in the Middle East. The one question I have, which is a follow-up to what he's saying, is what is the one reason why a peace between the Arabs and the Israelis would be in my best interest as an American? And does that mean I have interests in the Middle East, I have interests in Iran, in Syria? Our brothers yesterday were talking about subdividing Syria into 50 billion pieces.
what's my best interest in the Middle East, and why would the Palestinian-Israeli conflict or resolution thereof be in my best interest as an American? And it might be investments, it might be economic, it might be, I'd like to bring it home. And a peace in the Arab-Israeli conflict, does that mean my investments or a whole new market for us as Americans to invest in?
Yeah. I'm going to duck that right now, but I want to focus on your question. And what I heard in the last session was striking. It was stunning what I heard. And I think that one of the things that we ought to talk about, if Ratib's here, and he's not, I don't think, but when he comes back, is we ought to talk about...
He's in the back.
Hey, there you are. We ought to talk about bringing this discussion to key committees in Congress and talk about restructuring aid programs and talk about focusing aid on specific economic development projects that support private sector growth. Because that's where it's happening. And this is not, this is not the trade-off, grow the economy. I mean, I remember Al Gore used to say when we started Builders for Peace that economic development is necessary for peace. It's not a substitute for peace. It's not the way to peace, but you need it as a complement to peace. And so this is not about give us economic growth in the territories and we don't need peace anymore. That's not the solution. But while we're kind of waiting for political developments to work out, shouldn't we be creating jobs to keep people in their homes? Shouldn't we be creating investment opportunities to give young people a future? And the answer is yes. And I think that the problem is that you all had a nice discussion among yourselves, and you're spreading the word with religious communities around the country. But Congress needs to be challenged about what are you going to do to help grow the economy there, and how can we translate the minute the aid program goes to AID, it's dead. It needs to go elsewhere, and it needs to go into a separate fund that will support institutions that are investing, creating jobs, and show a return on the investment, and not being run by, one quick story. I chaired the session at the Casablanca Economic Summit, the one that came out of Oslo, and we had 3 Palestinian ministers on the panel. And after the session was over, they were great, incidentally. A kid comes up to me. I say kid because I'm old. He was about 31 years old, actually, not about. He was 31 years old. And he said, can I meet the ministers? And I said, yeah, who are you? He said, I just got the AID grant to train Palestinians in entrepreneurial skills. $12.1 million. AID, some creature in the bowels of the agency, right, with like visor and garter on his sleeves. This is great. Let's teach them economic skills. I said to myself, you give Palestinians 2 nickels, they start a business. They don't need to be trained to do it. And so I spoke to Nabil Shath, and I said, this is the kid that got the AID grant of $12.1 million to teach you all how to be entrepreneurs. He was furious. He wouldn't talk to the kid, and rightly so, because the point is that the aid has to be demand-driven, not...
Isn't that what Romney said in Israel?
Yeah.
That we have a cultural problem and we're incapable?
Yeah. He should go to San Francisco and see who owns the grocery stores. I mean, and started with the grocery stores and now owns half the real estate in the city. I mean, this is not a community that lacks for entrepreneurialism. So the point, in other words, is that Congress needs to hear that, be challenged with it, understand that's where developments are going to take place in growth. That's where you're going to create a middle class that's going to create the next political leadership for the Palestinian community. But they're not going to hear it if we keep it to ourselves. So we have to go and challenge them, redirect the aid program where it matters. That's how you create jobs and support the future of peace.
We are exactly 4 minutes past end of this session. I think one of the things that I got out of this is that hope is still something that we should use as we proceed with our efforts to help Palestinians in general, and specifically Palestinian Christians whose numbers are dwindling because of economic and occupational reasons, primarily occupational, but also economic reasons. So this is, in my opinion, a great conference, and I believe that this is my first conference to attend, and I will be coming next year, Ratib. I will be coming next year.
Ultimatum. Promise or ultimatum?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.